I'm going to attempt to make 3 settings for this car all at the same time to show the differences between the tires and the values in the suspension required for those tires. And this is a car I haven't tuned yet. It drives really nice. There's a little bit of drifting in the stock settings with no changes to the car whatsoever. They recently did a suspension update in one of the updates that passed, and this car is much easier to drive. This car used to be a little bit tricky on throttle, but driving it with the Comfort Hard tires in this video is very easy to slide it around. I don't quite hit my apexes or anything, but it's easy enough, as you can see. I'm not that great of a drifter, and I'm not struggling to get the car sliding. I did go wide off track there, but maybe that's within track limits, I don't know. Final S-bend. These used to be really tricky to drift in Gran Turismo, but like I said, with the updates, it's a lot easier to get the transition drift like that. Okay, let's get on with the settings. So as you can see, it's let's show it first. It's all stock. The car normally comes with Comfort Soft tires. I'm going to drive with Comfort Hard tires, and then Comfort Soft tires, and then Sports Soft tires. And I'm going to compare the 3 of those. And no mods. Let's see. Alright, let's start with driving the car as it is with the Comfort Hard tires. This might get convoluted because I'm going to be making a lot of changes to different setups all at the same time. Okay, so it's understeering on the brakes. There's not very much grip. Oh, there we go. Let's see if I can actually drive smoothly around the track. Okay. A little bit loose on throttle, that's due to the lack of grip. It's easy to control the slide. But what I'm mostly paying attention to right now is the braking performance. Whenever I tune a car, I always start on the braking performance because it's the most important part of making a car perform well. Is how well does it perform on the brakes. If you don't have any confidence on the brakes, you have no confidence in the car. So I'm over braking and it's understeering pretty good. It should be a 3rd gear. So that's enough corners for me to tell what I need to do to the car. Okay, so let's do this. Let's go into the settings menu. Oh, if you can tell the difference between the audio quality, it's because I have a different microphone setup. I have my PC headset plugged into the PS5 controller, and I'm using the PS5 controller microphone to capture voice audio. And the microphone's in a different place, it's not as isolated. Hopefully you can't hear my neighbors talking. Anyway, let's go on to the settings. Okay, these are the settings. 190, 1.9 in the front, 210 in the rear. Go to suspension. It was at 190 and it's understeering. I'm going to lower it all the way down to 1.5. This is at 210. I'll leave it where it is. And everything else I'm going to leave the same. I would like to do cambers, actually, because I know what I'm not going to optimize cambers. This is not about optimizing cambers. It's just about suspension natural frequencies. I'm going to eventually end up here at 2.8 because these are narrow tires. I could possibly go up to 3.2 or so, maybe even 4 degrees of negative camber. I would generally never run 4 degrees, but it's possible to get performance out of the car at 4 degrees. But I leave it at 2.8 because I'm not going to spend time optimizing cambers, and these are within manufacturer's specifications for cambers. It's around 3 degrees or 3.2 degrees maximum if the car has adjustable suspension from factory. And I'm going to leave it at that. So all I did was change the natural frequency in the front and the natural frequency all around because I changed to fully customized suspension. The ride height was different. It was at 100 before, now it's at 85. I'm going to leave it where it is, and the enter roll is different. But I'm going to see how the car performs now on the brakes without changing the brake balance controller, without putting that on and changing the braking bias. Okay, here we go. So I need to brake early because I'm on the crappy tires. Car is oversteering a lot more mid-corner. Oh, didn't brake early enough. So the problem with these comfort hard tires is there's not enough grip to provide the amount of weight transfer I need to get the performance I want on the brakes. So here we go, trail brake into here a little bit, and it's understeering. You see I'm cranking the wheel, and it snapped into oversteer because I was turning the wheel too much as I lifted off the brakes. Let's try trail braking into this hairpin. Very high speed hairpin, wide open track. Heavy on the brakes, cranking in the wheel, and it's understeering. So I can't get any more braking performance from the suspension because it's already at the minimum stiffness. So what I need to do now is change the braking bias. I need to put on the brake controller. So this is the first step I take for tuning a car, and I'm doing this again. I made a video like this one with the Porsche Carrera 95. That's nitrous. This is brake controller, and I'm going to set it all the way to 5. Okay, 5 in the rear. Maximum rear brake bias. So I made a video like this one. I'm just doing it again to hopefully keep the algorithm suggesting videos like this. So that people can be more informed on how to tune cars and where to start tuning cars. I can't do these kinds of videos too often. I think this is pushing it pretty close to too often. Anyway. Testing the brakes. Not here. This is a lift, throttle lift only corner. A lot of mid-corner oversteer. Trail brake here, and it's understeering. So there's no more performance I can gain on the brakes, even with the brake bias on these tires. So that's the first phase of tuning cars that I take. So it's understeering. So I'm going to do that same thing, the same test with different tires. So let's see. Settings, car settings. I'm going to create a copied sheet, duplicate. Let's name this Comfort Soft CS Track 101, sure. Okay. And all I'm changing is the tires. Comfort Softs. Okay. And now I'm getting rotation on the brakes. it's barely noticeable in that corner. I need to exaggerate what I'm trying to show by causing too much oversteer, just to show that it is actually rotating on the brakes, so it's too late on the brakes there to do it. And I'm running with ABS on. Still a lot of mid-corner oversteer. Car is turning in, but it's not oversteering on the brakes. Let's see if it does. There it is. There's the oversteer. Countersteering on the brakes. That's the oversteer that I was trying to achieve with the other tires, which was not possible with the setup limitations. So I'm still getting a little bit of understeer on over brake pressure, but if I trail brake properly, the car will oversteer on the brakes as well as on throttle, but mostly on the brakes. This hairpin, it's not going to tell me much, but the last 3 or 4 corners are very important for the brake oversteer test because they're mid-range speed. I brake very lightly into the corners, so I can trail brake basically all the way into the apex. This is 3rd gear. Car is still not tuned how I'd prefer it to be tuned. The anti-roll is a bit soft. So I need to be very careful with my inputs, otherwise the car will snap because there's too much weight transfer left and right. Nice oversteer, countersteer into the corner. That's oversteer on the brakes. So I'm doing that on purpose. I'm not going to drive that way all the time. I'm making the car rotate on the brakes too much to show that it actually is oversteering on the brakes. So this is too much oversteer. That I'd prefer a little bit less oversteer. So I'm going to tune that out. Tune that out with these tires on the Comfort Soft. Okay, so all I'm going to do is bump this up to 210. So this is a known value for me. It's 210. It should work really well. Actually, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna prove that having really stiff suspension. I'll even go less than that. Let's go to 3. Really stiff suspension causes understeer on the brakes. So all I did was change the front natural frequency, and it's understeering now. So I'm turning the wheel, and it's understeering. Let's get into some more prominent trail braking corners. This is not so much of a trail braking corner. And this car drives so much better than it did when they released the game. So trail brake here, lightly on the brakes. There's some rotation, but not oversteer. So it's understeering. So it'll point into the corner pretty well. Maybe I should have made the suspension stiffer than this, but it doesn't oversteer like I was displaying with the previous setting. So anyway, now to adjust the suspension to a more preferred setting for these tires, let's go to natural frequency in the front and go to 210. I'm going to do this real quick. I'm not going to get ideal settings. I just want settings that show what I'm trying to prove. So there's a little bit of understeer on overpressure on the brakes, just as before, but there's less, just from that one corner I can tell, there's less oversteer. So I need to brake early here. Still comfort tires. Okay. There we go. And this is again with the brake balance set to maximum rear brake bias. Understeer, and got some oversteer right as I came off the brakes. Let's see, this is a better corner for trail braking. Nice oversteer there on the brakes. You can see the inputs on the side, on the left, bottom left of the screen. I was oversteering on the brakes. So this is pretty good. I'm just gonna stick with that. And change tires now. Okay, so I'm going to create another duplicate setup sheet and do sports soft. Okay, now all I'm changing is the tires again. Okay, I didn't change the suspension in any way or the brake bias in any way. And test it in this corner here. A lot of rotation on the brakes. Too much, way too much rotation. That's purely by changing the amount of grip in the car. So I can brake later with these tires. Corner faster. Lots of rotation there. And again, I'm doing exaggerated inputs to show what the car is doing. I can control the car like this. I can just kind of lightly trail brake into the corner. Down too many gears. Nope, that's supposed to be third gear. Downshift too early. So as you can see, I can control the car even though it's too oversteery, but I'm going to, in this corner, show that the car is oversteering a lot on the brakes. And with these tires, it's harder to catch slides, so I spun out. As you can see, it's oversteering a lot on the brakes. So what changed? The tires changed. Let's now accommodate the change with stiffer suspension. So this is the sports soft setting, and I'm going to adjust it. I'm going to go to maximum this time, just to see. Try to make it understeer on the brakes. But I already have a known value that works well with these tires. Okay, it still oversteers a lot on the brakes. That's probably the brake bias. So in other cars with these tires, I usually have -4 forward on the brake bias. So there's too many changes right now, all at once. So there's the understeer on the brakes. Okay, I'll change it back to max rear brake bias. Lots of oversteer on the brakes, but much less. Starting to stutter here. As a much more controllable slide with the stiffer front spring. I didn't just snap loose and rotate like I did in the previous test session. Okay. So the brake bias is definitely too far rearward. I set it to -4 and understeer. The car still points, but is mostly understeering. So with this setting, making too many changes at once, but I'm going to change the brake bias and the suspension. The known values from other cars that I know works well with these tires is -4 forward on the brake bias and 2.6 natural frequency in the front. And try it out. Let's see, what I was going to say something about suspension stiffness, whatever, I'll move on. Suspension stiffness is good at this setting for these tires. So with a new brake bias and the new suspension settings, the car still rotates a lot. Maybe I need to go to 2.7 or 2.9 even on the natural frequency. Oh, that's what I was going to say about natural frequency. So the reason why natural frequency is transferable between cars is because it is a property of the car itself, its own tuned mass, I guess you could say. As the weight on the spring is calculated by the mass of the car, or the natural frequency is calculated by the mass of the car and the spring rate combined. I don't want to get into the details of the math. Whereas if it was a direct spring rate, you would not be able to transfer direct spring rates to different cars unless the cars were very similar. But the natural frequencies you can transfer between cars because of the way the natural frequency is calculated. Anyway, getting off that point, I want to see how the car performs. The car was rotating. I'm kind of under driving the car, so I haven't been able to really tell how the car is rotating on the brakes. So I'm going to wait till the last 3 corners to test trail braking with these new settings. I think it was oversteering too much. So this is 3rd gear. Got a lot of rotation on the brakes and that sharp hairpin. Usually the car is more stable at slower speeds, but it's still too unstable on the brakes for that tight hairpin. Lift off. Car is not tuned the way I want, so I don't want to crash there. So let's trail brake here. A lot of rotation, too much rotation. So there's too much rotation on the brakes. I could adjust the brake bias. I'm not going to. I'm going to try and make this as concise and the opposite of long-winded, I guess you could say. I don't know what the short-winded maybe. I don't want to get too much into the weeds about the details of the car, tuning these to specific values. Let's just go to 2.9. Okay. I need to make some differential changes because the car is performing strange lifting off the brakes. And it's not strange, it's actually a known thing that if you have an open differential on the initial torque and you come off the brakes really quickly, it's going to rotate like that. So I need to increase the initial torque on the car to prevent the lift oversteer, brake lift oversteer. Understeer. I get a lot of brake lift oversteer though. Some people like that, I don't. I like the car to rotate while there's a lot of brake pressure, which is it's doing. Oops. It might have been a gear lock slide, I don't know. I downshifted a little too early. But it's getting some good rotation while trail braking properly. Probably too much. Oh, there we go. There's that rotation. Probably too much rotation, but I'm going to leave it as is. Okay. So as you can see, from the changes in the grip level, I'm going to skim over the settings. So from Sport Soft tires to Comfort Soft tires, Comfort Soft, the spring rates need to be softer to allow the car to transfer load across the front to rear axle. So from the rear axle on the brakes to the front axle. So no weight is actually being moved in the car, just load on the tires is being transferred. And then over to the Comfort Hard tires, which at 1.5, the minimum setting, is still understeers on the brakes, even with the full rear brake bias. So now to test something else out, I'm going to put on the Comfort Hard tires on the Sports Soft setup to show that it's just going to understeer terribly with not the soft, but the stiff suspension. And there's the understeer. I'm trail braking pretty lightly, and it's understeering a lot. The car is very stable though. Having over stiff suspension does make the car stable on these tires. So you can make it over stiff on any tire, it's just going to be a lot stiffer with a more grippy tire. So if you're using the race tires, it starts getting really stiff at like 4 hertz, and 4 hertz is a bit too much, even with the race tires. So it's just understeering even mid-corner. Understeer on the brakes. Just barely touch the brakes and it understeers. Okay, I think I proved the point. Maybe I'll do one more corner. Yeah, it's just understeering, braking very lightly. I don't have enough grip to get on throttle early. Okay, so on to the next phase of tuning. So after I do the front springs, I now do the rear anti-roll. Given that the rear spring rate is within a reasonable range. So this is at 230. I'm going to change the tires real quick so I don't forget. So the rear natural frequency is 2.3, which is not my preferred setting for rear wheel drive cars. Let's go to the Comfort Hard setting. Let's change the name so I can tell what it is. CH track. Let's have to spell it out. Oops. CH CK. And some numbers. 101. Done. Okay. So I can't make the car rotate on the brakes with this setting, but I'm going to move on anyway. So when adjusting anti-roll bar, what you're trying to do is reduce the roll. That's why it's called anti-roll bar. It's anti-roll, however you want to define that. But what it does is it distributes the load laterally across the front and rear axles. So from the left side to the right side and vice versa. And if you study tire dynamics, tire physics, whatever you want to call it, tire equations, you find something called tire load sensitivity, where as you increase the load in the tire, grip actually reduces, the maximum grip. So you get a buildup of grip as you increase the load, but if you were to distribute the load from the left to the right side, you'd have marginally more grip than if you had all the load on one side. I'm not going to explain the math behind that, but basically, in layman's terms, more anti-roll, more grip, to a point. There is a point where there's too much anti-roll. However, this game does not simulate too much anti-roll. 10, in this game is basically, I think, within mechanical limits. I don't know exactly how they calculate the mechanical limits in this game, but there's a point where there's so much anti-roll that you'd actually probably break something if it's too stiff because there's not enough flex in the system. So anyway, I'm setting it to 10. Preferably where it would be a good range, in the 8, 9, and 10 range. I noticed that if it's lower than 10, it just produces more snap oversteer, which I've explained in another video that if you increase the front anti-roll bar a lot, there's more snap oversteer. And if you have a lot of roll in the rear of the car, it just magnifies the snap oversteer caused by the front anti-roll. So I'm just going to do this, just increase the rear anti-roll and drive it. So still understeering on the brakes. So what the rear anti-roll will do, apart from reducing the roll of the car, is it causes the rear tires to load up faster in a turn. So there's maximum load, and then there's tire load response time. So how quickly does the tire reach maximum load? And both of those affect cornering in different ways, even though it's kind of a fact, they're both factors of the same system. So if the rear tires reach maximum load before the front tires, it is as though the front tires have more grip than the rear. And so if you have a stiff rear end, the car wants to oversteer more because the rear loads up faster. And so that you would want to conclude that maybe a softer rear anti-roll bar might be better, which in certain cases it is. However, when it comes to Gran Turismo and the snappy nature of the slides, which this is not very snappy because I'm on the comfort hard tires. Oops, I'm getting oscillations and the tire slides. I couldn't catch that smoothly. But basically that happens when there's too much roll in the car. It's like the car won't want to stop sliding. It'll slide left, and then when you catch it, and it slides right, and then back and forth. And having the stiff rear anti-roll bar reduces that effect. If you notice, I was able to catch that. It's called a tank slapper, where in a motorcycle, your legs would be slapping the tank if you were swaying back and forth like that from the rear end sliding around. But they transferred that terminology to cars, even though it has no bearing on car terminology. Okay, so what having the stiff rear end does is it prevents tank slappers. However, it makes the rear end easier to slide. Not just quicker to slide, but easier. So it is quicker to slide with a stiff rear end, but it's also easier to manage the slide with the stiff rear end. So now I'm testing the car, and I'm getting a lot of throttle oversteer. There's a lot of torque in this car, low-end torque in this engine. So there's part of it is that, but I can compensate that throttle oversteer with the suspension. So even though I made the anti-roll stiff, I can continue to complement the stiffness with the rear natural frequency. But I can achieve different results if I have a softer rear natural frequency. And that is allowing the car to squat on throttle. That is where the rear end goes lower as the weight or the load transfers from the front to the rear on throttle. So what I'm going to do is reduce the rear natural frequency. Okay, I'm going to lower it to 190. That is still stiffer than my preferred setting on really slick tire, not slick, but slippery, like hard compound tires. I was like 1.8 or so. And stock cars usually have less than 1 natural frequency, that is, less than 1 hertz. So now, that's a higher gear, so I didn't learn anything from that. With a soft rear spring and the stiff anti-roll bar, working in conjunction, working together, produces more rear grip on throttle. So I can still get it to oversteer because there's very little grip. And it's hard to convey just the nuances of the grip, but it's easier to get on throttle. It didn't just snap loose there, which it did get loose, but it didn't snap loose. That kind of, I got on throttle too early, too much throttle too early. Basically, having this stiff anti-roll in the rear and the soft rear spring makes the car easier to drive in layman's terms. But also, having the rear natural frequency too soft causes problems with higher grip cars. So let's drive a different car. I'm going to transfer the setting to the comfort soft tire setting. So lower this down to, actually no, 1.9 that's usually a good setting for this car. Let's do the sports soft. Probably still fine. But anyway, as the grip increases, it causes more body roll in the car with soft suspension. So I'm using these sports soft tires now. And I can just match the throttle with these tires, and it's easy to drive the car. So I can't necessarily make the rear spring too soft because it's already at a preferred setting for me. I would prefer 1.8, and it's at 1.9 right now, even with the sports soft tire. And let's see if I can cause a tank slapper. That's still manageable. If anything, it's better. But to continue the point, if it were too soft, it would cause too much body roll in the rear, which would increase the likelihood of a tank slapper when it slides, which it's not going to do because it's not too soft right now. But let me show you something. These settings, I'm going to max out the rear natural frequency with the sports soft tires. 370 or 3.7 hertz, which is really stiff even for a race car. So it's oversteering on throttle. It's still controllable. If anything, it's even easier to slide because the rear roll of the car is reduced in conjunction with the, it's combined with the anti-roll effect, anti-roll bar, which is very slidey now. Very little throttle input is causing it to slide, even with the grippy tires. So basically the rear spring rate affects throttle slide response in rear-wheel drive cars and four-wheel drive cars. So it's oversteering even more on the brakes. So I'm giving a basic explanation of these tuning parts, but all the parts work together, and as you change one thing, it completely changes the entire performance of the car. And right now, the car is more oversteery everywhere with the rear natural frequency so stiff. And in this high-speed section, I'm counter-steering a little bit at full throttle, going 100 miles an hour, which is usually, or kilometers per hour, actually 60 miles an hour, which is usually not good. So with this rear spring rate, it's actually easier to drift. Let's see if I can drift it. I can drift it kind of. It's a high-speed corner, so I wouldn't naturally do that there. Maybe with the Comfort hard tires I would, but these grippy sports tires don't like to slide. Let's see if I can get a drift going. Nope. Oh, no clutch. This car doesn't have a clutch pedal. I tried to catch the car by pressing the clutch in, but there's no clutch pedal in this car. So I was able to catch that slide in a more controlled way. I spun out, but it didn't just snap understeer is what it's called. It didn't just turn out of the corner. And that's because the roll stiffness in the rear is stiff. Makes it easier to slide the car in every sense. I mean, it slides quicker. It goes into a slide quicker, but also it's easier to control in a slide. But I wouldn't drive the car that way. So actually with these settings, with how I tune my cars, this actually doesn't even have the stiff anti-roll bar anyway. Let's drive it again and see how it goes. I would prefer the 1.9 Hertz setting with these tires, so there's even more slidey, more slidey. And this, even though it's more controllable in a slide, it's not quicker to drive, because if there's any counter steer in the corner, you're not using all of the grip of the tires. You're using too much rear grip and not enough front grip. The perfect corner balance would be barely steering into the corner, kind of like that, but counter steer is not good. It's called the four-wheel drift, where you're barely steering into the corner and the car clears the corner with barely any steering input. However, most people don't drive it that way because if you're driving a quick car, usually you're on grippy tires, and grippy tires don't like slides, so you don't want the car to slide at all. So most GT cars, like the Group 4 cars, Group 3 cars, they all understeer because it's better to have the car understeer than to drive like this and risk spinning out. But this is not a GT4 car or a GT3 car, so it's kind of easy to do, but it's not fast. So anyway, there's too much oversteer with the stiff rear spring. And it would very likely damage the car at 3-point-something Hertz that it's at right now. 3.7 Hertz. Something would probably break, whether it be the actual unibody where the suspension mounts are, or a suspension component might break at that stiffness. But anyway, this is a good setting for this grippy tire, and I would like softer with the other settings. Let's drive it as it is now. So as you can see, it was sliding a lot, very easily with the previous setting. Now I'm mashing the throttle out of the corner and it sticks. Which, if you remember how it was driving just a few moments ago, it was sliding off throttle. I could barely touch the throttle. Now I can mash the throttle and it turns really nice. I still can't just floor it in second gear. It's gonna throttle oversteer. but it's just sticking. I'm turning into the corner, a little bit of oversteer. It's very nice. All the throttle I can give it, and it's sticking. Okay. I think that basically concludes everything I want to talk about. To go in phases, recap, start with the performance on the brakes, and then when that's dialed in, transfer your focus onto the rear anti-roll, and then the rear spring rate, and make it softer or stiffer depending on your preference. And I'm going to change all these settings. 1.9 already, oops. And then this is at 1.9 also. Is there anything I can do? Let's drive it. Let's drive this one and with the settings I have now. 10 in the rear, brake bias at 5. Okay. So a lot less grip. I can still floor the throttle, and it's sticking. Of course, if I crank the wheel there, it will oversteer. But if I'm driving properly out of the corners, I can give it a lot of throttle, and it sticks. And this is with less grippy tires than the sports soft tires I was just driving with the stiff rear axle. A little bit throttle oversteer, but controllable. This car is performing really nice now on these tires. All right, I think that concludes this video. It's all about the suspension and how to go about tuning a car, where to start first. I glazed over cambers because it's not necessarily important when tuning suspension. It's the cambers you end up with for your final desired setup is important, but not for this video. So to recap, start on braking performance, adjust the front natural frequency to accommodate your desired braking performance, and then adjust the brake bias possibly, depending on your needs, and then focus on the rear anti-roll. And usually it's just stiff rear anti-roll, and if it's too stiff you can reduce it. Some sims allow you to have anti-roll bars that are too stiff. And then after the anti-roll, adjust the rear spring rate for the amount of throttle sensitivity you want, throttle oversteer sensitivity. So more stiff rear natural frequency, more sensitive throttle oversteer. Softer rear natural frequency, the opposite, right? And that is in conjunction with the stiff anti-roll bar. It does not work the same with a soft anti-roll bar because there's too much body roll. And that's that. Till the next one.